Welcome to this explainer. Today we're taking Fyodor Dostoevsky's notoriously daunting 700-page classic Crime and Punishment and, well, we're basically transforming it into an accessible, absolutely gripping psychological thriller. I am so excited to guide you through this material. We're going to break down the complex themes of literally one of literature's most intense works, and we'll use our time today to map out the brilliant and honestly totally feverish mind of a killer. Let's get right into it.
Okay, here's a quick roadmap for us. We'll be hitting the anatomy of a murder, the Napoleon theory, the psychological punishment, sinners and saints, symbols of redemption, and finally, lost in translation. So, Section 1, the anatomy of a murder. We are dropping right into St. Petersburg in the 1860s. Imagine a sweltering, sticky summer night, and boom, a gruesome, premeditated axe murder immediately hooks us into the narrative. The tension is absolutely through the roof.
Which brings us to a really chilling question. Is murder ever justified for the greater good? Because that's exactly how our protagonist, Raskolnikov, rationalizes his brutal crime. He doesn't just snap. He actually plots. He memorizes where this greedy old pawnbroker, Alyona, hides her money, convincing himself that by taking her out, he can use her hoarded wealth to help others, including his own destitute family. But then Alyona's gentle half-sister, Lizabeta, unexpectedly walks in, and he murders her too with the very same axe. Just like that, this carefully rationalized crime turns into a messy, horrific bloodbath.
Now, before the crime even happens, our guy is essentially pushed to the absolute breaking point. He's living in squalid conditions and harbors this deeply flawed sense of superiority over everybody else. Raskolnikov is a 23-year-old former law student, brilliant for sure, but totally destitute, highly arrogant, and just deeply alienated from society. And his mind? It swings violently between extremes. One second, he's handing over his last few pennies to a ruined family on the street, and the next, he's ruthlessly plotting to split an old woman's head open. It's intense. Moving on to Section 2, the Napoleon theory, and the actual motive behind the crime. Because the bloodshed wasn't just about scoring some cash. It was about proving a radical concept. Raskolnikov holds this really intense, Nietzsche-inspired belief that he belongs to an elite, Napoleonic class of people who are just free to commit crimes for a higher purpose. He literally wrote an article arguing that men like Napoleon are extraordinary, meaning they don't have to follow the rules of the ordinary human anthill. They have the ultimate right to step over moral boundaries, even shed blood, if it serves a grander destiny. So he committed the murder to test himself, basically, to see if he was a Napoleon or just a louse. As one modern reviewer perfectly hit the nail on the head, the murder actually happens very early on in the book, and then the long, slow, excruciating psychological unraveling begins. Because Raskolnikov isn't some cold-blooded psychopath. Actually, his conscience immediately starts ripping him apart from the inside out. And this whole unraveling is made so much worse by his physical environment. He's holed up in this claustrophobic, messy, suffocating fifth-floor room where he can't even stand up straight. He just lies on his sofa for days, slipping in and out of sickness, paranoia, and these completely terrifying fever dreams. The physical suffocation of that tiny space acts as the perfect metaphor for the psychological noose that's tightening around his neck. That leads us right into Section 3, the psychological punishment, the agonizing torment. And guys, this is the true focus of the novel right here, that agonizing, inescapable torment inflicted by a guilty conscience. To give you an idea of this super heavy atmosphere, one reader actually did a tongue-in-cheek scientific analysis of the book. Notice the 0% for pleasant strolls. Yeah, Dostoevsky turns the emotional dial all the way up to 11. Everyone in this story is desperate, in debt, or basically on the verge of madness. And right at the center is Raskolnikov, playing this incredibly tense game of cat and mouse with Porfiry. Porfiry is a brilliant police detective who suspects him almost immediately, but he just patiently waits for the killer's own mind to force a confession. It's brilliant. All right, Section 4, Sinners and Saints, Contrasting Compasses. Because amidst all the psychological unraveling, Dostoevsky masterfully surrounds our protagonist with characters who act as totally contrasting moral compasses in 19th century Russia. First, we have Sonia. She stands as the ultimate symbol of purity and redemption. She endures incredible suffering without a single complaint, just to save the people she loves. Her dad is a hopeless alcoholic, her stepmother is dying of consumption, her siblings are starving, so she's forced into prostitution. But despite being pushed into the absolute darkest corners of society, her soul remains remarkably untainted. She becomes the moral anchor of the entire novel, and the only person Raskolnikov can finally unburden his terrifying secret to. On the complete opposite end of the spectrum, we have Spidrigайлov. He acts as the dark mirror to Raskolnikov. He's a repugnant predator who totally embraces transgression, but ultimately, he finds nothing but emptiness and destruction. Get this, he actually hears Raskolnikov confess to Sonia through a wall and then tries to use that secret to sexually blackmail Raskolnikov's sister, Dunya. He is the true embodiment of a man living completely outside moral law. But unlike Raskolnikov's grand theories of greatness, Spidrigailov's life just ends in profound cynicism and a really shocking suicide.
Which brings us to Section 5, Symbols of Redemption, the philosophical battle. As Raskolnikov navigates between these extreme poles of good and evil, he faces a massive philosophical battleground between emerging radical logic and traditional orthodox beliefs.
The crushing weight of his alienation essentially proves that the human psyche just cannot withstand the burden of disconnecting from humanity. It's impossible. He starts to realize he didn't just kill an old woman, he killed his own connection to the human race. He can't even embrace his visiting mother and sister because the sheer weight of his guilt acts like a literal invisible wall keeping them apart. So the crucial question here is, can suffering actually lead to true redemption? Well, in Dostoevsky's worldview, suffering is the forge in which the soul is purified. Raskolnikov's rational, highly logical mind fights against this idea tooth and nail, but his subconscious, his actual conscience, completely craves the punishment.
This realization is what finally sparks his path to salvation, and it is a slow, really painful journey where his arrogant ambition is finally replaced by genuine human connection. He confesses, takes up Sonia's cross, and turns himself into the police. And it's only much later, while serving an 8-year sentence in a super bleak Siberian prison, with Sonia faithfully following him there, by the way, that his pride finally shatters. Through her boundless love, he experiences a profound spiritual rebirth.
Finally, Section 6, Lost in Translation, Interpreting Culture. Because, pulling back the curtain for a second, how we interpret this entire journey actually depends heavily on whose words we're reading in English. Academic research highlights that every translator is basically an interpreter of both word and culture. They have to decide exactly which aspects of Raskolnikov's story to emphasize. For instance, Constance Garnett introduced the English-speaking world to Dostoevsky, but critics argue she kind of flattened his erratic, feverish tone. Then you have David Macduff, who smoothed out the syntax to make it read more like a traditional Victorian novel. And then, Pever and Volohansky, they're famous for using historically accurate dictionaries to strictly capture the polarizing, often ugly, and chaotic tone that Dostoevsky originally intended. An academic analysis of these texts reveals a really fascinating consensus. It's only by examining these subtle translation differences that we can definitively prove Raskolnikov makes a full, explicit conversion to Christianity at the novel's end. When you meticulously decode the nuances of the Russian text, it shows that his rebirth in Siberia isn't just some vague emotional shift. It is a direct spiritual awakening, specifically designed by Dostoevsky to counter the dangerous nihilistic trends he saw rising in the youth of his time. Ultimately, Dostoevsky's masterpiece isn't just some dusty 19th century relic. It's an enduring mirror that challenges our own modern moral boundaries. It forces us to ask terrifying questions about ego, isolation, and the incredibly heavy cost of putting ourselves above the rest of humanity. So I'll leave you with this thought. If you were pushed to your absolute limits, how far would you go? And could your conscience survive the consequences? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer today, and I'll see you in the next one.